You're listening to The Real Short Box, a comic book podcast made for geeks by geeks.
It started with a laugh, a disembodied, haunting laugh that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere. The mocking voice that accompanied it was strange and venomous, a voice that sent chills down the spines of early radio listeners. "I am the shadow," the phantom voice proclaimed. "Conscience is a taskmaster no crook can escape. It is a jeering shadow even in the blackest lives. The shadow knows."
Welcome, everybody, to The Real Short Box. My name is Darren.
My name is Donald.
And my name is Kevin.
All right, guys, welcome. As you could probably surmise, we are going to be doing an episode about all things The Shadow this evening. I've been really pumped about this. And you want to know why I'm so pumped? Because my research will be very thorough. And do you know why it's going to be so thorough?
Why?
Because I've spent all week at jury duty.
Oh my goodness.
Oh, that makes sense.
I know the feeling.
Yeah,
You know all about justice then.
Yes, I do. Jury duty and downtime are just synonymous with one another.
Did you, when you were being interviewed to be selected, were you like, "The weed of crime bears bitter fruit"? And they were like, "What?" "I don't want to be here. Send me home."
I mean, it did feel dark and there were spotlights, and I had sort of that Rorschach voice just going over, narrating my life, sitting here wondering who is innocent and who is guilty. It's just, yeah, and I was going through a lot, actually.
By the way, were you an alternate juror or were you like a juror?
No, I was a juror.
Lucky you, because I was an alternate juror and I had to still be there, and yet I had no bearing on the decision when it was time to
Oh,
to
that's
go.
true. That's pretty awful.
I was so pissed because I took copious notes during this trial.
Copious.
And I wanted to like pass my notes over to the rest of the jurors. "Oh, no, you can't do that, sir." I'm like, what was the point of me doing this then? and literally, they kicked me out. The 12
they were
jurors.
like,
Yeah, pretty much.
I mean, luckily, I got out early. The trial was still going on when I requested to leave to go back to work. And you know, to the judge's credit, he eventually did it. There's just one of the lawyers wanted me to be on this panel for some reason or another, even though I just clearly had other things going on. But hey, you know what? I don't know if justice was served. I just hope it was.
There you go. That's all you can hope for.
Yes. So, guys, we're going to first get here. I am very excited to get into the history of the Shadow. And also, of course, you know, historic parallels, which are my personal favorite thing to get into. So let's talk about it. This is the first appearance of this character, is July 31st, 1930, on a radio program called Detective Story Hour. All right? His alias at the time was Lamont Cranston. His first appearance in print, April 1st, 1931, in a book called The Living Shadow, where he portrayed Kent Allard. Now, here's what was going on roughly about this time. Our President of the United States was a former miner and engineer named Herbert Clark Hoover. Hoover was a brilliant engineer, graduate of Stanford, actually.
Created vacuum cleaners, did he not?
It's a good question. I want to say he did. He has two massive public works projects that we will see forever, the Hoover Dam and, of course, the California LA aqueducts.
Yeah, but no one comes to see the aqueducts.
No.
Everybody loves that damn dam.
That damn dam.
Mm-hmm.
Did you ever see Vegas Vacation?
Yes.
I love the damn guide and the damn tour.
It's your damn tour. Yeah.
And I had to laugh once in that movie. Mm-hmm. But anyway.
Oh, God, that's so true.
We had a bad day in our history. It's called Black Thursday, October 24th, 1929, where the stock market crashed. It actually dropped by 11%. We also had another historical event we were living through that was Prohibition, the 18th Amendment of our Constitution.
Oof. And the Babe Ruth, can't forget him.
But the Babe, yes. I don't know how he's an historical event.
Oh.
His life is a historical event.
Yes, it is, absolutely.
John Goodman played him.
I like that film.
It's not bad.
He looks the part, too.
He did, absolutely.
Right. So, of course, why is this all important, you ask? Why is Darren giving us a history lesson? Well, during the next 12 years, our country would be going through an economic depression, which at times had 26% unemployment. Could you imagine 26%?
There would be blood in the streets in this day and age.
And remember, we had a much smaller population, so 26% is much more significant.
And you only had a radio.
Yeah, absolutely. So where this kind of I'm going with this is many cases in world history, an increase in poverty, at least in the immediate, is directly related to an increase in crime. Picture that you're living in a crime-ridden area during the Great Depression or even like Prohibition. Just think about this for a second. According to the FBI, Chicago alone had 1,300 gangs pop up during Prohibition.
Yeah.
Okay.
Hey, a lot of money to be made.
That's about 100 less than I have now, I think.
The interesting thing here is the streets. I mean, they're likely to surprise you with, God, who knows, drive-bys, muggings, who knows? And
Tommy guns going off on you.
precisely.
See?
See?
Got my Tommy gun.
And, of course, here is the Shadow, a crime fighter during, a period with crime. As is often the case, order naturally has to come from chaos, everyone. And this order began as a mysterious radio show narrator July 31st, 1930, as we mentioned on this program, Detective Story Hour. It was specifically designed to boost sales of Street and Smith's monthly pulp, Detective Story magazine, which at the time was one of the hottest titles out on newsstands. And listeners of the program actually began requesting copies of the Shadow Detective magazines before they even existed. So people would walk up to a newsstand. Oh my gosh, where's that Shadow? Oh, well, we don't know. So naturally, how does this all end up? Street and Smith create the first issue of Shadow magazine, April 1st, 1931. Another key date I want to get into is September 26, 1937. The Shadow debuted as a radio drama. The original episode was called The Death House Rescue.
That's pretty severe.
I
The
think
name.
It almost seems there's one too many words for me. Can it be the Death Rescue? The Death House Rescue?
The Death House sounds good to me.
The Death House.
Unless they're like, what? And then you're like, oh, that death.
Yeah, and you've created enough urgency, of course, at this point where you're going to be like, a Death House? What is going on there? All right, so, so, of course, the Death House Rescue. And I'm sure, do you remember the introduction of the show? What is it, the Shadow? What is his catchphrase he always likes to say?
I believe he says,
Which one?
The Shadow knows.
That's right.
Or who knows what evil lurks in the hearts of men? The Shadow knows.
Ding, 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 ding.
That's a great one.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, and this is exactly kind of where this became the catchphrase of catchphrases at the time.
Absolutely.
So I'm going to skip forward to January 5th, 1940, the Shadow serials. It was the 9th serial released by Columbia, starring Victor Jory. It was 15 chapters at 85 minutes. Man, I'm just so satisfied right now. You see? The thing is, we foreshadowed this in our Indiana Jones podcast. I had brought up the Shadow. It's important. This is how this stuff all comes back. Lots of things from older times inspire lots of things in our newer times.
And if you haven't heard our Indiana Jones podcast, we do have a two-parter that is already available. You can watch or listen to on iTunes, YouTube,
and the like. And it's a good one. You will be so educated.
Yes. If you really are into Indiana Jones, no one's doing it more thoroughly than us, I promise. The Shadow squares off in, of course, this original with his arch nemesis, the Black Tiger. A person who can make himself invisible and, of course, attempts world domination.
of course.
What would honestly would these guys be without attempting world domination?
Hey, it's all about the world domination.
Mm-hmm.
Now, here's the thing. Victor Jory, to his credit, honestly, I just always thought he was very faithful to the radio character, especially a certain sinister chuckle when he would confront a villain. What does that chuckle sound like? Music to my ears. Well, this was released on June the 1st in 1940, and eventually, of course, as we'll get to later, this was not the last thing to hit the theaters that had the Shadow's name on it. Now, Donald, I was curious, what exactly do you think really made this comic book unique or very interesting?
As far as the comic book itself, I think the fact that it had so much depth to draw from, so much story. You were mentioning the radio program, and real quick, to show you some of the ideas that they had. They were very crafty to get the Shadow going, and they wanted to make sure that the magazine was successful. And the magazine is also where they would have, pulled a lot of the stories and ideas for the comics. But Street and Smith, they launched a contest on the Detective Story program offering $1,000 in cash prizes to those who could best describe the Shadow based on a series of clues read each week on the broadcast. To the radio audience, the Shadow has been a voice, very creepy and sinister, but what did he look like? What type of man was he? That no man may know his identity. The Shadow broadcast, they put him in a cloak, his true face completely masked, beginning Thursday night, January 29th, and each succeeding Thursday evening for a period of 10 weeks, the Shadow would give hints over the radio as to his appearance and habits. If you were, keen to it. It was funny because a kid in school proclaimed, I believe his name was Bobby Reddick, to his first grade class. He said his daddy was the Shadow, and he said he could best describe him. Turns out he was sent home because they thought he was lying, but it turns out he was telling the truth. His mother brought him back in and explained that his son, actually, his father was Frank Reddick, one of the most respected actors on the airwaves, and the unseen voice of the Shadow.
It's something here. This may have been a lost moment, and far be it from me to lecture these guys, Street and Smith, how to do the Shadow. But could you imagine if the Shadow attacked you as a Shadow?
That'd be really scary.
Yeah.
And
absolutely.
Really cool. Very comic booky.
Yes, very, very comic booky. And that's why it led so well into the comics. One more quick thing about the radio program was of course, and I'm not sure if you mentioned Orson Welles, very famous radio voice that did a part on that. But then we made its way, once they did the ad and the campaign to draw people towards the magazine, they started doing a lot more of these pulps. And these stories in magazine form led to the formation of the comic books. Now, something that's very interesting about the comic books idea itself is that there was a story which is called The Red Blot. Was Walter Gibson's 35th Shadow novel, but featured the first meeting between Lamont Cranston, and this is important, guys, and Commissioner Weston, who had been introduced in Hidden Death back in September 1932. The friendship continued throughout the Shadow pulp novels and played a key role in the Shadow radio series, where the perpetually wrong Weston would often be played for comedy relief. Now, we got that a lot if you understand the 60s Batman television series. You would understand where the police commissioner and the police chief of police?
Yeah, Chief O'Hara.
Yeah, Chief O'Hara kind of took that role in that Batman TV series. And the reason why I'm mentioning Batman is because Batman would not exist if it wasn't for two things. One of them being Zorro, and the other being the Shadow.
Huh.
Yes, wealthy men who put on a mask to defend the common folk.
And
Yes.
it's like you and I, of course, know this, Kevin, but I think Donald, I really like you to get into it because I think it's very fascinating how the Shadow did inspire Batman.
Yeah, I mean, it was a very simple idea that they, and if you listen to Kane, Bob Kane, interestingly enough, his last name being the spelling of Kane, and Orson Welles, writer, director, and star of Citizen Kane. I always found that to be a little bit funny. Yeah, I mean, they just took the idea of this mysterious character behind a mask that was cloaked and shadowy, and he brought fear into the hearts of men.
Delivered urban street justice.
Urban street justice. That wearing a cloak, a cape, aka a cape, being very seedy. Lamont Cranston being the primary alter ego, him being a millionaire, kind of all about playboy in a way, and hiding the fact. Having people in a network working for him. All these things that came together, having a bunch of villains that were very quirky and had very dynamic names. All this stuff came together. And when Bob Kane was looking at ideas, that came to mind, and he decided to work out the idea of the Batman.
So kind of like this whole idea of
With Bill Finger, don't forget that.
Of course, with Bill Finger, who probably did more of the work than Kane at this point, we can probably say.
Yeah, the thing, too, is this whole idea of the similarities between the two, using the theatricality to essentially win the battle before the battle even begins. They're already in your head.
It's probably the art of war.
Absolutely. And that's, I always find that to be quite interesting. I think that was trailblazing
Sun
for a
Tzu
character.
would be proud.
Yes, he would.
Now, to go a little bit more into the comics, The Shadow was first adapted for comics several times. It was during his long history. His first comic appearance, now we're talking comic, we're not talking in the pulp form, was in June 17th of 1940 as a syndicated daily newspaper comic strip offered through the Ledger Syndicate. The strip's story continuity was written by Walter B. Gibson, with plot lines adapted from the Shadow pulps, and the strip was illustrated by Vernon Green. Due to pulp paper shortages during World War II and the growing amount of space required for war news from both the European and Pacific fronts, the strip was canceled in 1942. I believe it was June 13th. After 2 years and 9 adventures had been published. The Shadow Daily was collected decades later in 2 comic book series from 2 different publishers, first in 1988 and then again in 1999. Go figure. In Mad magazine, or just in Mad number 4, Shadow was spoofed by Harvey Kurtzman and Will Elder. Their character was called The Shadow with an apostrophe, which is short for Lamont Shadow Ski D Boom Boom. I have no idea. The Shadow is invisible as in the radio series. When he makes himself visible, he is attired like the pulp character, but is very short and ugly. His companion, Margot Payne, begs him to cloud her mind again. Throughout the story, someone is trying to kill Margot, getting Shad, as he calls himself, into various predicaments. He's beaten up by gangsters and has a piano dropped on him. He tricks Margot into an outhouse, the interior of which is an impossibly huge mansion, which he demolishes with dynamite. As the Shadow gleefully presses the detonator, he says, "Nobody knows to whom the voice of the invisible Shadow belongs." This story was reprinted in The Brothers Mad in 2002. He then returned in Mad number 14. And also, okay, now this is a big one for me, guys, and this is near and dear to my heart. During the superhero revival of the 1960s, we all know what happened during the war era. A lot of heroes were very popular, but as the heroes joined in on the fight, kids became more enamored with the actual heroes of wartime themselves. So a lot of romance comics came up and about around that time. A lot of war books came around that time in comic book form, and the heroes started to die off in a way. The 50s became more towards horror. That really turned against them with the whole, Congress committee and the
Dr. Wortham.
Dr. Wortham, yes, and the Comics Code Authority.
The book burnings.
Being formed, yes, and the book burnings. So they decided to bring back the superhero. You know, it's a little more light and lively and fun and fresh. So they did it in the 60s. Archie Comics published a series of Shadow books. They only got through 8 issues, guys.
Just 8?
Yes. From August 1964 to September 1965 under the company's Mighty Comics imprint. In the first issue, the Shadow was loosely based on the radio version, but with blonde hair. In issue 2, this is the fascinating part. In issue 2, the character was transformed into a campy, heavily muscled superhero in a green and blue costume by writer Robert Bernstein and artist John Rosenberger. Later issues of the 8-issue series were written by Superman co-creator Jerry freaking Siegel, guys.
This is what I'm looking at right here, right?
You are looking at issue number 3 of the Archie series of The Shadow. This is the second appearance of him in the crazy bluish purple tights with the green, shorts, gloves.
That does not look like the Shadow
boots, and cape. Now, I didn't know. I thought this was a different character. And it even said, special bonus book-length novel, Shi-Wan Khan's House of Horrors. And I was like, oh, well, that sounds familiar. Mm-hmm. And then at the bottom in red, and then like in a red banner, and in yellow and white, it says, "Who knows what evil lurks in the hearts of men?" only the Shadow knows. And then I was like, oh shit.
It's him.
So this is legit the Shadow. So I picked this baby up. I think I got it for like $7 or something like that. It's a 12-cent cover from '64. And it's a beaut, guys. It's a beaut.
Yeah,
Outstanding
that looks
cover
good for a 55-year-old comic. That looks great.
Yeah, I love the cover art in there too. I mean, it's almost like, I was trying to figure out where the water ended in the fountain, and the greenery there. Like it's pretty minimalistic too, except for even in the people.
Yeah. There's a lot of smooth spaces, I guess you could say, and the characters pop. Like the villains here, a couple of them are wearing masks.
Yeah.
They should all be. I don't know why the Asian gentleman in the middle. I don't know if he's wearing a mask.
I mean, that dude looks ugly enough. I
Or
don't know.
or if he's just the main villain. I can't tell. But I had to get this. It's a beautiful book. It's a yellow cover. The Shadow's in red. It says The Shadow, and of course at the top, approved by the Comics Code Authority, which is
which is very important. Well, at least,
necessary.
At least
yeah.
it was back then.
Yep. And then we get to the 1970s, guys, and this is also a very important time. The 1970s, DC Comics got the rights to the Shadow, and they published a what they call an atmospheric interpretation of the character. Now, it was by writer Dennis O'Neil,
Yes.
who we all know and love. Denny O'Neil could write the hell out of anything. He's a phenomenal writer. He wrote The Question. Without a question, the best interpretation of The Question.
Did a great job in that Green
Lantern
Arrow run.
Yes, he did. They did a 12-issue series from 1973 to 1975. Michael Kaluta drew issues 1 through 4 and 6 and was followed by Frank Robbins and then E.R. Cruz. Attempting to be faithful to both the pulp magazine and radio drama character, the series guest starred fellow pulp fiction hero The Avenger in issue number 11. Shadow also appeared in DC's Batman number 253 back in 1973. This is in which him and Batman teams with an aging Shadow and calls the famous crime fighter his biggest inspiration. Now, again in Batman number 259, that's in December of 1974, Batman again meets the Shadow, and we learn the Shadow saved Bruce Wayne's life when the future Batman was a boy, and that the Shadow knows Batman's secret identity. He assures Batman, however, that his secret identity is safe with him.
That is a really, I don't know. I feel like you could really bury yourself in a hole there. As a writer, because I mean you're basically kind of removing the fourth wall a little bit here. I mean, now Batman is dealing with people and doing time travel.
Well, if you understand the importance of this series, then you would have a huge appreciation for a Batman the Animated Series episode that came out called I think it was called Beware the Grey Ghost, or
Beware
just
the Grey Ghost,
yeah, and in which Adam West played the voice of a character called the Grey Ghost, which was basically the Shadow, but
couldn't say it.
You couldn't say it. Yeah. Probably my favorite Batman the Animated Series episode of all time. And if anybody's listening and you have yet to see that, please seek that out. It is a treasure of an episode, not only because of Adam West being the voice, but also because of the references to the Shadow that they so delicately place within and with much care. It's a beautiful episode.
And I'm just so fascinated too, because when that Batman animated series was originally, advertised, I didn't watch it all that often because I'm like, oh, it's just something that's meant for kids. But wow, what a great series!
Just phenomenal.
In high demand everywhere, honestly.
Phenomenal series. Highly recommended if you get a chance. Real quick then, in 1986, they did another adaptation. Howard Chaykin, it was a 4-issue miniseries called The Shadow, Blood, and Judgment. Brought the Shadow to modern-day New York. While initially successful, this version proved unpopular with traditional Shadow fans because it depicted the Shadow using 2 Uzi submachine guns, as well as featuring a strong strain of black comedy and extreme violence throughout. The Shadow, set in our modern era, was continued in 1987 as a monthly DC Comics series by writer Andy Helfer. It was drawn primarily by artist Bill Sienkiewicz, I never get that right, and Kyle Baker. In 1988, O'Neil and Kaluta, with inker Russ Heath, returned to the Shadow with the Marvel Comics graphic novel The Shadow, Hitler's Astrologer, set during World War II. Now, this is a funny thing, and I think, Kevin, you mentioned this, that the Shadow's pretty much jumped across every single damn publisher.
Which is incredible.
Yeah, from Archie to DC to Marvel, and even most recently to Dark Horse, and even most recently to I believe it was Dynamite.
Dynamite Comics.
Yeah, Dynamite Press or Dynamite Entertainment. Yeah, even took that over, and Garth Ennis did a sort of a prequel of how Lamont Cranston became the Shadow in a way, which in also a way kind of foreshadowed a little bit of the movie that we got, which came out in 1994. And I think, Kevin, you're going to speak a little bit to that, yeah?
Yes, 1994. This year's the 25th anniversary of this classic mid-90s film with a very young Alec Baldwin. It was directed by an Australian actor named Russell Mulcahy. Mulcahy, thank you. Who also directed the first two Highlander movies.
Yes.
And Ricochet.
Oh, I don't want to even think about Highlander 2, The Quickening.
Oh, come on.
It was one of the weirdest, most terrible movies.
What was the fourth one? Is that the one that had them both together?
Yeah.
Adrian Paul and Christopher Lambert?
That was Endgame.
Yeah, that's it. Highlander Endgame. And they replayed the same fight sequence twice in the movie, just later in the movie, and thought you wouldn't notice.
And that's a long movie, too. Like, people forget, that's 2.5 hours. Now, Highlander 3, The Final Dimension, the only thing I remember is they're having a sword fight to Dr. Feelgood by Motley Crue, and that's just too funny to me.
Hey, you can't go wrong there. Well, Motley Crue. Now, the movie was written by David Coep, who also wrote Jurassic Park, Carlito's Way, and Mission Impossible.
Is that how it's pronounced? I've been saying Kep for years. Is it Coep?
I'm just saying that just because it sounds that way, but hey, if you say it's kept,
yeah, he
I'll
wrote
go with it.
the original Spider-Man movie with Tobey Maguire as well.
Yes, he did. Mm-hmm. So you have some talent on this film, and along with Alec Baldwin, you had Penelope Ann Miller.
Oh, and she is a fine-looking woman in this. She's still a fine-looking woman.
Yeah, she played Margot Lane, the telepath. Yes,
Darren, we worked with her not too long ago, right? Just a couple of years back.
Yeah, it's kind of amazing on that volunteer project. We worked with everybody.
You did.
I think this is no coincidence. We really did. No, I had lunch with Penelope. I feel like you were with me too, Donald. I mean, it's a full table, but it's just so pleasant. I've always pictured her as some like real sleek seductress, but she's just like a pretty normal, regular person, to be perfectly honest with you. Into all kind of the geeky stuff that we're into.
Mm-hmm.
There you go.
Which is always a nice bonus.
Always a nice bonus.
Always a nice bonus.
And also the movie had Peter Boyle, a future Magneto, and Ian McKellen, and the great Tim Curry.
Tim Curry. Now that's a character I could get behind in there. What character did he play again? What was his name?
He played the assistant to Ian McKellen. Ian McKellen's character is Reinhard, who is in charge of. He's kidnapped to build an atomic bomb.
Right.
But your boy Tim Curry, his character's name is Farley Claymore.
Claymore, that's right. Because I remember Alec Baldwin kept yelling, Claymore!
Yes, Claymore!
It's like, Claymore!
Claymore, yeah, it's an explosive.
And Claymore decided, to volunteer to be a bad guy.
And if there wasn't a character just ripe for being, or an actor ripe for being the Joker,
Mr.
Tim Curry is on fire in this movie, and you can see it in his face, the passion that man brings, 100%. Right then and there, I was like, that's the Joker.
Yeah, he got to play Pennywise a little bit later on.
He did.
He really grew from the Rocky Horror Picture Show.
He did.
Yes, he did. All of his characters are significantly different and more layered. I mean, he played Lord Darkness in Legend.
In Legend. Scary.
The devil character. He played, Mr. Body in Clue, which was phenomenal.
I mean, I quite enjoyed him as Hector Hamolka in Congo.
Yes.
Yes.
Also,
diamonds.
Put down my sesame cake, or stop eating my sesame cake.
Mr. Hamolka.
Yeah.
Delroy Lindo is just always one of those great characters.
He's a great character.
A Life Less Ordinary, I believe he was in, if I'm correct. He played like an angel of sorts, him and Holly Hunter.
Not quite sure on that one, but I'll take your word for
I
it.
think that's what it was in, and he was phenomenal in that too. Just a great actor. Yeah, that's somebody you don't hear enough of, to be honest. Delroy Lindo.
Oh yeah, very good character actor.
Yeah. But anyway, back to the movie.
Yes, one last person I want to give props to and credit to, Frank Welker. He plays the Furba, the dagger.
Megatron.
Really?
Yes.
Oh my God! I did not know that.
Frank
Wow.
Welker, of course.
That's some trivia for you.
There you
A
go.
legendary voice actor.
Oh my goodness, you can't go wrong.
His
there.
voice acting
Amazing.
goes way beyond
We
Megatron.
walked past him, Kevin and I, at a Comic-Con once, and he was doing the voices. Just for there was probably like 15 people stand around this little table, and he's just doing voices, like one after the other. It was so cool.
That's
just to
freaking
get to
awesome.
walk past. Comic-Con's great. For those that haven't been, the big show is what we called San Diego Comic-Con is great for a lot of reasons. I always said that if we stop finding these little gem moments, that's when we should stop going.
Yes.
Right.
And each year I say that, and each year I
There's always
find
something.
there's always something that makes me go, wow, I am glad I am here.
And it doesn't have to necessarily be a celebrity that you meet. It could just be a regular person you have a great conversation with.
Yeah, regular person, or and even celebrities. Let's be honest, most of them, believe it or not, are regular people. You walk into them, they're going to the market. Most of them don't. Most of them aren't A-level superstars. They don't have the money to hire assistants to go to the market for them, or to order in all the time, or have it delivered, or whatever. They're there. They're out there. They're going places because they have to. They have bills to pay just like everybody else. So yeah, I mean, it's always cool to bump into somebody. I remember having a very intimate, kind of a unique conversation with Stephen Moffat, who was the writer and producer on Doctor Who for a while, during David Tennant and even clear up till the older gentleman's run on Doctor Who. But he did, him and I talked, and I had mentioned his show that he did called Coupling. Mm-hmm. And it's Peter Capaldi, by the way. I had a brain fart. He played the older Doctor Who. But I had a run-in with him, and we were talking, and I mentioned Coupling, which was a show he did that inspired Friends.
Friends, that's right.
And he was like, "Oh, sorry about that," in his accent. And I was like, "No." I was like, "I actually enjoyed it. I watched it. I was dating this girl at the time, and she got me into it. And it was a lot of fun." And I said, "It's not as dated as you think." And he was like, "Oh, great, good to know." He's like, so he's a nice guy. So it's funny you can have these moments still at Comic-Con.
Now, Kevin, what was the tone of this movie sort of like?
It kind of has a fun, cheesy vibe. It's set in the 1930s. It takes place. First starts out in Tibet, where Lamont Cranston, he's being like a warlord of sorts, like an opium kingpin, until he's captured by servants of the Tulku, who wants to change him and say, "Hey, you know what? You are doing wrong. You need to be redeemed, and you're going to be redeemed." And of course, that dagger I mentioned, the Furba, played by Frank Welker, is kind of a nice little tool of coercion.
I almost want to throw someone in a corner and go, "Redeem him!"
Yes, they pretty much said redeem him. So of course he is redeemed. He goes back to New York City. He meets Margot Lane, and also the very first action sequence that you see him as the Shadow is really cool. I know Donald, we were looking at that again. You see he's on a bridge. This this older Asian gentleman's about to be executed by these gangsters, and you just hear the laugh. You hear that violent laugh, and then everyone's looking around. What is it? The guy's with his Tommy gun. He's popping off. He's just shooting at air, and then he's coerced by the Shadow to turn himself in, or else.
Those scenes have played out so many times in superhero movies, and I gotta be honest, I like all of them.
Yeah, but this was even cool because he's literally using the Shadow to his advantage, or shadows to his advantage. So it's this really cool introduction of what he can do.
There's some really cool stuff that happens in there. You were showing me earlier, because it'd been so long since I'd seen the movie, and Kevin came in for the podcast really excited about it. He was really jonesed about this movie because he'd watched the whole thing over and over and over again, and he knew his stuff when he came in here, and he was like, "You got to see this scene," and he showed me the scene, and I forgot all about it, but there's the outline of the Shadow, and it's very rudimentary, and you're like, "Oh, well, this is whatever." And then they throw daggers at the Shadow on the wall. And then you see the Shadow try to move, and it can't get out of it. And then you see Alec Baldwin as the Shadow step out of the actual, this is where it gets good, out of the actual Shadow itself and become the man from the outline. Blew my freaking mind. This is 2019, guys. I came out in 94, and it still blew my mind how cool looking it was.
Excellent effect.
A lot of this is still very good. If you look at the movie, so much of it is still so good right now. Even that dagger still looks good.
Yeah, dagger looks awesome.
Yeah, I mean that wasn't real. There was no real floating dagger. You know what I mean? It looks great.
Yeah, the way it was executed, and also the bad guy Shiwan Khan, played by John Lone. You have a great little matchup there. They both have the thing with their eyes where they hypnotize people. So the shadow of Alec Baldwin, Lamont Cranston, has a silver eye look. His eyes turn silver. Meanwhile, Shiwan Khan's eyes turn red. So you see how the contrast, between the good guy and the bad guy. And also, Shiwan Khan, he's kind of like a cheesy villain, but he's funny at the same time. You know, how he commands people to do his work.
Yeah.
Especially when he gets that guy to kill himself, that poor guard.
Oh, the poor guard. I thought it was funny in the movie and generally in the idea of the shadow, the fact that if he saves your life, you owe him a debt.
Yep.
And he'll decide when that debt is paid.
That's right.
He would give them in the movie.
ring.
He gave them his rings, and they would have to wear the ring. And when he wanted to reach out to them, it would glow, right,
Like
or
glow.
beep, yeah. And then they would have to respond, or if they were given a tip on something bad that was going to happen, they would have to reach out to the shadow somehow in order to communicate. Yeah. So in a network of spies.
It's kind of sort of mafia-esque, though. You know, how, like, you remember in The Godfather, he's like, hey, I'll do this favor for you, and I may ask you for one. Now, this day may never come.
Right.
But I will ask you,
100%.
if you have to do it, you must commit to it. And I find that fascinating because, obviously, I don't think the shadow's coming from a dark place. I think he's saying, look, I saved your life. Here's the deal. You have to know what it's like to give your penance.
In a way, he is coming from a dark place. The shadow was not the most purest of characters. In order to understand evil,
You have to actually get yourself in
you have to
the
be
depths, the heart of darkness,
right.
essentially.
So you become corrupted, and then you have to fight out that. So there's this constant inner struggle of the demons within the shadow, this evil that he had to let in order to understand the mind of the villain, which is an extremely fascinating aspect of this character that doesn't get talked about a lot.
That's true.
That this character is
operating
in the gray, like hard gray. You know what I'm saying? Sometimes dipping a little too far down the gray.
Hey, I think Frank Castle would appreciate that.
I'm sure Frank Castle would appreciate
Well,
that.
it's the old motto, nothing's for free.
In fact, it would be a good argument to say he might be the first anti-hero. Yeah, in a way, because he definitely, there was a line that you could say crossed a little bit. So,
in this movie, he kind of did on a couple occasions.
Yeah, well, he didn't have them guns just to, show them off to his friends.
Nope.
Speaking of which, on the table here, I don't know if you guys can hear me with it, but if you can hear that's the shadow flinging his guns up in the air as they squeeze his legs.
He's popping them off.
From the 1994 action figure that came out from what company, Darren?
That'd actually be Kenner.
Kenner, yeah, Kenner, the creators of your favorite toy line.
Oh, the original Star Wars.
Yeah, and this figure's really cool. Partially because of just the design of it. He's all black, and he's got a red cape. It's red, real bright red on the inside, but on the outside, it's like a darker maroonish red. It's very cool, and it's a cloth cape. And then he's got the red cloth thing over his face, but his eyes, the top of the hat is a clear red, like amber red plastic. And when you hold it up to the light, his eyes glow this sinister red.
Oh!
Which is super cool. So this figure is really well done because they decided not to go with the battery aspect, like you push a button on his back and the eyes light up and then it'll die in a year if you play with it too much. You didn't have to worry. You just held it up to the light and he became, so he would be up in the air, kind of swinging off something or up in the rafters, and then you would see these glowing eyes. And the Ninja Turtles already knew they were in trouble. I mean, because my characters crossed over when I was younger. Everybody was like, so.
Well, I tell you, Kenner always makes a durable toy. And that's something that
good quality.
I haven't bought a new action figure, of course, in an extremely long time, but I have noticed going through department stores and stuff, the figures have gotten smaller and they appear to be a little cheaper in quality. And, that's something that you can't play with a toy if it's going to break, folks.
Yeah, kids aren't going to be too happy about that.
No. Any other closing things about the movie?
Oh, the ending is just pretty funny. Well, that's not pretty funny. It's actually a really cool scene involving the mirrors.
Okay.
I actually like that, especially the sequence of them.
Oh, yeah, where the mirrors
break.
And then the piece gets into
it gets implanted into his
Khan,
head.
yeah. I wanted to say Shere Khan, but
that's the character. That's the character from Tailspin.
That's a different character.
Tailspin in the Jungle
also
Book.
A cool character in Tailspin. Cooler in
I
cool
loved
in
him
Tailspin.
because he's basically like a corporate, executive and a very deep, powerful voice.
Did you know that Tailspin really didn't have a long? They don't have a lot of new episodes.
That's
All
true.
of it was basically on rerun for 3 years.
Yeah.
I believe
Underrated
about
show.
30. Oh, I love it. my lovely lady, of course, has the entire series.
I'm not surprised.
It's actually
She's a
quite
Disney
big Disney
fan,
lover.
for
But
sure.
it is quite enjoyable, though.
It is.
You know, it is quite enjoyable, though. And, you know, it's something that...
Absolutely.
you know, when I kind of look at it, like, I didn't really get into the other Disney cartoons, although I do remember the debut of Darkwing Duck, because for some reason...
Darkwing Duck.
Just called
DW.
DW.
Yeah, Darkwing Duck really excited me for some reason or another. And
Yeah.
it was just...
Oh, it was a cool idea.
And LP, Launchpad was there.
Yep.
Yes, of
yeah. They
course.
did a lot of crossover stuff, which I really liked. One more thing about the film ideas. In December of 2006, Superhero Hype, the web series, they reported that director Sam Raimi and Michael Uslan would co-produce a new Shadow film for Columbia Features. Now, in 2007 of October, Raimi stated, "I don't have any news on the Shadow at this time, except that the company that I have with Josh Donen, my producing partner, we've got the rights to the Shadow. I love the character very much, and we're trying to work on a story that'll do justice to the character."
Josh Donnan is a really cool dude. Sorry, it's
okay.
Donnan. I've met him a couple of times through a friend. He is really something.
Down to earth.
You want to talk about a sharp guy. Like, this isn't just some guy who tripped and fell into the executive's role. He's really good at his work.
He knows his stuff.
Knows his work.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, in 2012, they asked him again at Comic-Con about the status of the Shadow, and he said that had not been able to develop a good script, and the film would not be produced as planned. So it doesn't look like... It's been 7 years since then. It doesn't look like we're going to get a Shadow movie anytime
Basically
soon.
in development hell.
Yeah. They also tried a video game attempt in 1994, but the film did not do well, so the box office kind of killed the idea for the
True,
game.
$48 million box office on a $40 million budget.
Whew.
That doesn't work out too well.
No, not too well.
No, and speaking of which, you know, of Sam Raimi, after we got to watch him basically work up close, we were his assistant directors. I mean, this guy really is another one. He knows his stuff. It really doesn't surprise me.
I can tell he's meticulous with his work.
It doesn't surprise me one bit when I watch the Evil Dead movie that I'm like, okay, this is where he comes from. He comes from a part of filmmaking where he used to have to do every little
storyboards, everything.
thing. Not even just storyboards. I'm talking about this guy.
Except camera placement.
He knows camera placement. He knew how to book locations. He knew how to raise his own money. You can tell he started from the bottom.
Well, he maintained that indie filmmaker mentality.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I could not believe in Spider-Man 2, the Doc Ock sequence where
that
they're
was straight from
operating
Evil
on
Dead.
the spine.
Straight from Evil Dead.
And yeah, the camera being on the tentacles like they're alive. And yeah, straight from the Evil Dead Army of Darkness times. So good. So well done.
What's
Beautiful.
funny is I first saw the Evil Dead movie, the first one in its entirety, when I was in college in the late 90s. And I kid you not, the first time I saw that, I said, this guy should direct a Spider-Man movie. And then when he got picked, I said, oh my gosh, I know it's going to be awesome.
Yeah.
Because he, literally, the way...
That redefined Marvel as a company. It saved their bacon. It really did. And it showed them that if it wasn't for that Spider-Man movie succeeding as well as it did, we probably would not have the MCU.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, my older brother always used to say...
at least the bigger versions of it.
Yeah.
My older brother used to always tell me, he's like, he got really excited for the first X-Men movie. And, he likes X-Men, but I was just curious why he was so excited. He said, Darren, their whole philosophy of, we're not going to jump into the comic game until we have the technology to do it. And the special effects, at least for X-Men, and going into that first Spider-Man with Sam Raimi, they blew my mind the first time I saw him. On top of the fact, too, Sam Raimi is a real, legit Spider-Man fan.
That's right.
Totally legit. He only wanted, basically, Silver Age villains.
Because that makes sense. That's what he grew up on.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yep. Yeah. I think that's a pretty good comprehensive overall
With summation of the
right
whole-
with the history of the Shadow. Anybody have anything to add? Or?
Yeah, now that we've completely blown your minds and overloaded you, how about we hear from our favorite guy, Spiro?
A righteous man.
Oh, sorry to interrupt, everyone. Just wanted to mention real quick about a shop in Canoga Park, California called Spiro's Heroes. Elliot, the proprietor of the store, has over 300,000 books in what's called the Temple of Comics. That's Spiro Heroes in Canoga Park, spirosheroes.com.
Sounds better than ever.
The sweet, sweet sounds of Spiro's Heroes. Say that 10 times fast.
The sweet sounds of Spiro's Heroes. The sweet sounds of Spiro's
Say it
Heroes.
sexy, though.
The sweet sounds of Spiro's Heroes.
Yeah.
Man,
there we go.
I really liked revisiting The Shadow. This has just been great. So, with that being said, hey, I'm Darren.
My name's Kevin.
I'm Donald. Find us on Instagram, YouTube, Facebook, iTunes. You can listen to us there. And, if you can't listen to us, maybe sometime we can see you
At the comic shop.
This has been The Real Short Box. We'll see you at the comic shop. Thanks for listening.